They are going to pop up on the screen and join me now. So welcome, everybody, to Dubai.
Thank you so much.
Okay, connecting to Avaya Spaces. Unmute yourself, guys.
Everybody, can you hear me?
Yes, Mimi, thank you so much.
Hello, Ritchie,
Yeah.
can you hear me?
I can indeed.
Good,
Hello.
everyone's there, fantastic. Really, really exciting to see you. And Saleema, you and I, look, we've coordinated our outfits. You're as yellow as I am, and I'm as yellow as the stage, so we clearly planned that very, very well. So welcome to the stage, guys. Thank you for joining us from all around the world. We've got people streaming and sharing virtually from all over the place. We've got speakers from all over the place. So we've got a truly global event going on. I've introduced you all, I'm not sure if you heard me, but I did, and told everyone we're going to be talking about getting comfortable with the uncomfortable. And I'm going to continue to walk around so that I can look at you, for everyone in the audience there in front of me here as well as behind me, and lead that conversation. So I want to start with a Deloitte survey, which I came across, and anyone listening, you should look it up, it's really interesting. It's called The Makings of a More Confident CMO. And it was from 2019. Really, really interesting read. And what the Deloitte research showed is actually quite sad, because it shows that so many CMOs are still struggling to really get acceptance with the C-suite. I thought we were over that and integrated, but apparently we're not. So everyone on the virtual screen behind me, this is where we're going to start. We're going to start talking about C-suite acceptance. What that research also showed is that when organizations get that right and the CMOs are integrated, they see positive impacts, including longer-term sustained growth. So it's good for the CMO and it's good for the board. Ritchie, perhaps I'll start with you. You obviously engage with lots and lots of organizations and CMOs. How do we start to change this, Ritchie? How do we start to help our CMOs, or indeed our C-suites, to integrate marketing at that table?
Wow. Well, look, Mimi, first of all, great to be here, live from London. I'm going to start a little bit on a positive note in this respect. I think that at the hands of the global pandemic and all we've been through this year, that the customer has probably been elevated in the boardroom more than ever so before. There are just so many examples where businesses have had to pivot, change their entire business model in order to realign to a customer's new reality. And I guess to that extent, when I think about it as, the CMO being the ultimate customer champion, perhaps this year in itself has been the year of the CMO. And what I think, and I was doing a bit of research myself and came across a really interesting McKinsey study, and it found that in increasing uncertainty, 83% of CEOs actually go to their CMOs for solutions. So that kind of, in some respects, paints a slightly interesting and positive picture. And let's dissect that a little bit as to why that might be the case. But first of all, I think that the perception of a CMO is perhaps someone of a troubleshooter, maybe of a change agent. And actually some of the key characteristics of a CMO actually hold them in very good stead during troubled and uncertain times. Things like being brave, for example, willing to take risks, and of course, perhaps the most important being the voice of the customer. So to some extent, I think this year has probably been a transformational year for a CMO in the boardroom. Perhaps the door is slightly more edged open than it was in previous years. But let me just kind of sort of finish on a thought that although the door is open, the ways in which to actually open it still further are completely changed from any other year in a much more cost-conscious environment. And I think to that extent, CMOs have to operate very differently, really putting data, insight, and being able to justify the way that they're able to operate in this new sort of world. And I think that's going to hold them in better stead. So doors opening, the way to approach the door to become even further open is perhaps very different in tomorrow's world.
I love that, Ritchie. Thank you for bringing some positivity to that Deloitte report. Nalin, what are your thoughts? Ritchie says the door is open, and things are changing. What's your experience here in the region, in your business? How's that changing?
Yeah, Mimi. So as consumers, we are too busy to pay attention to advertising, but we are desperate to find good stuff that solves our problems. A good product with lousy marketing has got a very grim chance of success. Now, take an extremely simple example of sliced loaf bread. It is a product you find in every kitchen and you won't even notice today. But in 1912, a simple machine that was invented, take a whole loaf and slice it, it was a complete failure. But 20 years later, other companies started marketing sliced bread. Now, even though this example may date a century, what I'm trying to emphasize is that the importance of marketing hasn't changed. And all the more, CMOs have a bigger role to play in today's times. I mean, CMO is the person who can make an important contribution in strategy development. The CMO is the person who brings an understanding of the market and customers that can help the top management of the organization in making decisions on which markets to enter, which segments to focus on, which products to develop, and what companies to approach as partners. So I think the importance has increased over the years. It has always been there, but all the more today in the dynamic times that we live in. Marketing function is actually the face of the company, and the organizations are realizing that. And CMO is no less important than any other C-suite members. And together with the other C-suite members, I mean, he or she works strategically to the best benefits of the business, and we can't ignore that.
Fantastic, thank you. I mean, again, painting a really positive picture. So Saleema, we've got doors open, we've got bread that's sliced. If you are in an organization that isn't yet there, where the two gentlemen have just spoken about, what are some of the things CMOs could be doing to provoke that change? How might they build that momentum in the organization?
Sure. Thank you so much, Mimi. I'm here from Washington, D.C. Welcome. So my perspective as someone that teaches design thinking, that works a lot in the innovation strategy space, but with a background in marketing and having been a serial entrepreneur, I see that there's a lot of opportunity and a lot of collaboration as we see a lot of companies, with marketing and innovation collaborating. And I think that there's a lot of opportunity to build new ideas, new products. We don't even have to be looking for a problem to solve. Sometimes it's really about figuring out how we can leverage, combinations of existing ideas. As Seth Godin always says, that it's about how do we create more original combinations versus how do we build new products or bring in totally new ideas or invent new things. And so I think with marketing, there's a big opportunity to collaborate with other parts of the organization, especially with, the chief innovation officer or like their teams and different innovation teams throughout the organization, because there is that merge happening. We see that happening. Just coming from the design thinking and innovation space, we also see that, there's just so much around ideas for problems that don't even exist yet. It's really about storytelling. We're talking about marketing. And so I think marketing is at the forefront of the business. They understand their consumer. I heard Ritchie also talk about, the importance of the customer, and essentially, marketing is really understanding the community, because in this very day and age, we have to be building a community. There's no such thing as a business or brand if we don't have a community. And we also see that alignment with employees as well. And so marketing understands that story, and they know how to tell that story, and they know how to work with other teams around the organization. So marketing is extremely essential, and I think there's a huge opportunity there. Thank you.
Thank you. So, Saleema, I heard you talk about storytelling, and the marketers are uniquely placed to be able to link that customer experience and that journey. But Paul, we're talking about discomfort, right? Comfortable with the uncomfortable. Change kind of sucks for human beings, right? We don't love change. We just don't. So if we've got people in the audience or live streaming today who are saying that's all very well and I agree, but my CEO doesn't think that, how might people have those uncomfortable conversations to start changing it?
So first of all, thank you for the opportunity, and then greetings from sunny Abu Dhabi. I think you're pretty much hitting the nail right on the head. As they say, this might be an opportunity, but it can also be a very, very dire situation for many. So the way to embrace the change is to focus on the opportunity. One of the biggest challenges for people across the board is they're measured on the deliverables that they cannot control. I think it was Albert Einstein who said that if you evaluate a frog's ability, you know, to fly, it's really not gonna get there. So what's really important, again, you know, to look into the role and the core value driver of the CMO. So as a champion of the customer experience, it's going to be a rather tough battle. Why? Because you need to balance the level of the accountability as well as the authority. So in other words, how can you positively impact the customer journey? If you look at the statistics, the biggest turnoff for the customers is the customer experience. It's the quality of the product, of the service, price, followed by the functionality. So which of those elements can you directly influence as a CMO? So my recommendation to deal with the change is to really embrace it. Upwards of 8 out of 10 companies are going to be changing their operating models, and that's a really great opportunity to reposition as a CMO. Make sure that you renegotiate your position at the primary access as the C-suite team member, renegotiate your KPIs, objectives, and make sure that you are measured on something that you can control. So that's my 2 cents.
I think that was 10 cents, not 2 cents. I think that was excellent. I love what you said at the end, because I actually say that a lot in my work as well, which is that what is measured manifests. And I think it's such an important point. If we don't start to change KPIs and what our organization expects of us, very difficult, right, to create sustained long-term change. So from the position itself and being brave around making that change, I want to talk about dominoes, okay? And I'm going to tell you why I want to talk about dominoes. Because I think that the best marketing work out there is like a domino. Once it falls, many fall after it, right? But to be the first domino, to be that marketer that is producing work that is creating a ripple effect that's impacting people over time, you have to be pretty brave, right? You have to stand up, speak up, do something different. And that is undoubtedly, nearly always, and I've done this my whole career, really, really uncomfortable for people. So, Saleema, let's start with you in the US, arguably one of the countries that leads some of the boldest, bravest, kind of Super Bowl level, you know, communications out there. How can CMOs be more comfortable with being a domino? I bet you've never been asked that question before.
Yeah, so I would say that first of all, the CMO should be, I really like what we talked about, repositioning the CMO, and I think ultimately leading community engagement and being known as that person that's managing, you know, that community, or even having that sort of public engagement, having that face. I think it's really important, and being able to inspire their team to help them with that repositioning. And essentially, I think, you know, working closer with customer experience, which we discussed, and community engagement. And like I mentioned, the business is not really a brand without the community, and really trying to leverage the storytelling again, like I said earlier, because essentially, you know, that domino effect, it's very interesting, because you need to figure out how to get people's attention today in a world that whatever we do, for example, this year, we're all on Zoom, we're doing all this video conferencing. This particular conference has done something very different, but next year we're like, okay, what are we going to do? People are zoomed out, people are tired of webinars. How do we do something differently? And so there are some conferences like VR conferences. Now that sounds cool. Do you have the latest headset to be at this VR conference next year? And so really trying to figure out how we can do things differently requires the CMO to essentially be like an entrepreneur and figure out, if they're going to be the strategist, they need to have, you know, or they have to have the right team in place that can complement their personality and help that marketing department grow and work with the different parts of the organization. I think that there's a lot of opportunity, but I think that ultimately CMOs need to be the entrepreneurial thinkers, and be able to go ahead and bring new ideas to the table, test things. I think iteration is important, testing things at a small scale and trying to fail fast in order to pivot. I think implementing, you know, methodologies such as design thinking and bringing innovation in, I think is really, really key to test as much as possible. And I think that will help them increase their influence within the organization, because they, through the testing, through the piloting, through showing the board, through showing the leadership, hey, this is working at other organizations, or this is working at a small scale, let's scale it up. I think it's important for them to adopt that entrepreneurial mindset.
I think you're absolutely right, but I also think that's quite intimidating, especially if you've grown up kind of in a very corporate structure. So Ritchie, how can we, what advice do we have to become that Domino, to become that brave, entrepreneurial, dynamic, multifaceted, the list goes on? How are we seeing that happen? How can we help people?
Well, look, I think it's certainly a challenge for most CMOs who perhaps are stuck in corporate cultures and organizations that don't necessarily lend themselves to some of the change processes that Saleema was talking about. But I really liked some of the the words and terms and things that Saleema was saying around community building, entrepreneurial mindset. Actually, I've got a golden nugget. In fact, I was talking to a high-flying CMO just last week, and what he said worked effectively for him is for him to become a creator himself. And this is really interesting because he's part of a SaaS-based company, and he uses all the tools his company actually uses, as well as his competitors, in order to create his own community, to create his own following. And what that actually does is it helps him to understand at a more macro level what are some of the changes and how actually to build out his own personal community, which he can then translate to upskill himself and build confidence when he goes out to his team to say, well, I'm actually walking the walk here. We can do this on a much greater scale and level. So it's doing a lot of things, building confidence, building brand, and also getting him or her to be that sort of test and learn sort of approach that you need in a CMO role today. So my top tip is become a creator yourself, because I think that will take you leaps and bounds to being able to help your organization push through as well. Lead by example.
So Ritchie, I think it's a great idea, but anyone that asks me how, I'm going to give them your telephone number to answer that question, okay? How do I
Let's do
put
it.
that into my day? Nalin, what do you think here? I mean, what are you seeing in Oman and in your circles? How are marketers responding to so many challenges in terms of being brave and creating impact?
Absolutely. I think I agree with what Ritchie said and what Saleema said, and what you mentioned about connecting with the community. I think that's an extremely important point that as marketing experts, we need to always keep in mind. For any marketing campaign to succeed, connecting is an absolute necessity. You have to be innovative, you have to be authentic, and you must understand your target customers. Sometimes you may have an awesome product to sell, but the customer sentiment attached to a particular product may lead to a complete product failure. So you need to understand your market. Now take an example of Coca-Cola, for example. When they launched the new Coke, people fond of the soda drink had such a close affinity with the original Coca-Cola that they rejected the new product. And even though Coca-Cola pitched it as a better product, but it was rejected in the market, and then they stuck to the original product. Another peculiar example that especially is a Middle East example, I remember many years ago reading that Coca-Cola didn't realize the local culture impact. In the Middle East, where Arabic is a primary language and is read from right to left, they experienced a fiasco. The soft drink ad, which was so successful in the Western world, which was depicting an ape on the extreme left, moving to the right, transitioning to a civilized human being holding the soft drink in his hand. Now, while the intent behind the ad was to depict that as humans have civilized and got progressed and educated, professionals have started consuming Coca-Cola. But in the Middle East, it appeared that a person had a Coke and then gradually transitioned to an ape. So you have to be very conscious of the culture. You have to understand your audience. One thing which may work in a particular market and be absolutely successful may completely doom in the other market. While some campaigns, I mean, take Nike's Just Do It, which has been successful for more than 3 decades now and has appealed to consumers globally. And the sales before the campaign was like, let's say, I think about $800 million US, and in a decade they reached 2 billion plus. So you have to understand the customers, you have to be unique, you have to be authentic, and understand the pulse of the market you are in. So if you're not doing that, I mean, domino effect, connection with the community, nothing is going to happen.
I couldn't agree more. And I think, what the three of you then in that sort of answer have unpacked is this kind of entrepreneurial, multifaceted, creative role that these CMOs have. Paul, I want to jump to the next question because it very much segues from where Nalin ended there, which was knowing your consumer, knowing culture. So in order to be able to make these decisions, you have to know who you're talking to so that you can use instinct, right? And you know, we've talked a lot about already this week, and I'm sure this afternoon as well, data and how we can use data and how important it is. But data won't necessarily help you in some of those really nuanced, cultural, local, human insights. I think there's an argument that many CMOs have lost connection with their consumers, with the human. How do we pull that back? How do CMOs become more connected and empathetic to their audiences?
Yeah, I mean, it's $1 million question, but let me build on some of the points that my dear colleagues just mentioned. So let me tap into what Ritchie was saying. You know, so rolling your sleeves, getting things done yourself is definitely the right way to do it. That said, you know, there is an empirical approach. So not to dwell too much on the science, but let me just try to be as colorful as possible. Is it realistic to expect development of the mathematical formula that will predict a musical hit? That's a question. You know, perhaps not. But this is the same predicament that today's CMOs are facing. They have to find that fine balance between being creative and being empirical. So that's the game that we need to play today. So essentially, you're moving from a T-shaped professional to E-shaped professional. So essentially, rather than having one deep vertical, you have to have 3 deep verticals as a CMO. So one of those is clearly going to be technical, the other one's going to be marketing, and that third one is very likely to hinge on your ability to develop strong connection with the cultural milieu of your customers. How do you know, it's everyone's guess, but at the end of the day, it's a must-have. So what my key point here is, you know, we really need to break out of the traditional competency architecture of the CMOs, and we need to start evolving the CMO role as well as the job description towards that E-shaped professional, which is quite common across the primary axis and the CXO suite. So essentially, you got to get better in more than one thing that you do.
Great. I love that idea of an E-shaped professional. I've not heard that before, Paul. I really love that. Saleema, probably one might argue that the US has had more cultural change, conflict, discussion, debate this year than in any other recent years. Tell us a little bit from your point of view in America, how are CMOs getting to know their consumers? Because arguably there's a lot changing very, very quickly. How are people staying on top of that? How are they connecting with those realities?
Yes, of course. So we've seen a lot happening in the last several months, and it's interesting how this entire year has been the storytelling and advertising or marketing campaign in itself. But essentially, I would say that, you know, leveraging the consumer story, and this is where we see that there's a higher demand for accountability, especially as we see with the younger generations, Gen Z and the millennials. We see that they're wanting to hear directly from people that have experienced the product, or they have direct interaction with the product or service of that company. And so essentially it would be, you know, there's no magic recipe. I can share a story. Several years ago when I was, you know, I actually attended a startup event, and I had been a successful entrepreneur before that, but I didn't know that that was cool until I came to the US. And at that very event, I had the guts to tell my story to the sponsor, and that sponsor happened to be Elance, which is now Upwork. And as I told the story about running a successful translation business, they actually recorded me on the spot and said, I'm going to send this to my CMO. This is a great story of how you used our platform to build your business. And next thing you know, I got a job as a storytelling brand evangelist to go help other startups, you know, learn to use this platform. I basically managed an entire WeWork partnership, helped WeWork launch here. And it was really through just being a customer, and there was no magic recipe. They're like, hey, let's start a startup education program where we can now get all these evangelists who are successful at using, you know, they're happy customers. Why not get the community to go get our brand out there? And it was really trying to get creative with partnerships. I think that's something that the US is doing really well, is how do we do unconventional partnerships? How do we do hyper collaboration and pitch and try new things, even at a small scale? and see how what we can scale up from there. But I think it's really getting creative with the community engagement and stop seeing it as a sort of hierarchical, sort of like the marketing team needs to do all the storytelling, but really leveraging the customer. I think that's been something that we've seen be really, really creative here in the US. So that would be my 2 cents.
Fantastic. So creativity in that storytelling really, really matters. Ritchie, I know at the School of Marketing you work with lots of marketers to help them, progress their careers, look at areas like this. If you had to give a couple of tips on how marketers could do this, how can marketers, get to grips with creativity, with storytelling that resonates, what would some of your top tips be?
Well, look, it's an interesting question. And I think that let's first of all go back to understand where creativity sort of comes from. And I think it comes from 3 levers. And in fact, often people think that creativity is a combination of lots of sort of, tensions colliding and then suddenly some magic happens. And I don't think that's the case. I actually think it's all about curiosity. It's about some level of conflict, but a healthy level of conflict. And a real healthy dose. I think Saleema talked about partnerships and things like collaboration. So I think for me, when thinking about how to leverage and bring on creativity, it's about sort of those 3 kind of those dimensions. Ultimately, I think creativity sort of or any breakthrough innovation sort of starts by looking internally, looking at yourself, having the right team, having the right dynamics, having the right diverse teams that you can collaborate with, as well as, of course, your key stakeholders, that allow you to kind of work in a very open sort of environment, in an open and honest way, where there are no real conflicts of interest, and of course clearly collaborating with the customer as well. So if you can kind of match those 3 concentric circles of internal stakeholder engagement, agency, suppliers, and then customer, I think you're onto something quite rich when it comes to the development of creative and innovative solutions. As long as all the incentives are aligned, by the way, I think that's very, very important to try and get those incentives as much aligned as possible as well.
Yeah, back to the whole what you measure manifest point. Really, really valuable. Nalin, what do you think about creativity? Where do you think that sits in an organization? Obviously, you're leading a very large, established organization. What's the role of creativity for your CMOs or for the CMOs you engage with? And how do you think we nurture that?
Yeah, I think absolute important, because what has happened is that with the traditional advertising, which has disappeared very fast, or it's disappearing fast, and with the internet medium gaining so much of popularity, organizations have realized that if people could skip ads, they would. And in the internet world, it makes no longer any sense for organizations to recreate mass marketing and create commercials which the consumers could skip easily. So marketing today actually has evolved from advertising to storytelling, and storytelling is all about creativity. Marketers understand that people care about their story, they're successful. And if they don't care about their story anymore, the organizations have disappeared. Yeah. And how the stories are knit is based on the worldviews that we have ingrained in our lives. For example, fresh home cooked meals has become a luxury today, to have like 3 fresh home cooked meals today. Whereas it used to be a normal lifestyle many years ago. In today's times, with the economic boom and fast lifestyles, eating fast foods, the guilt of not having fresh home cooked meal every day has deeply ingrained in our lives. And that's why when we go to the supermarket, we look at the organic section, or we look at fresh home cooked style meals and pick them up. And supermarkets command premium on these organic products, because supermarkets get like 20,000 new products every year, and everything is fighting for the premium shelf space. But companies knit a story of a product which is grown in an organic, pesticide-free farm, or ready meals just like homemade, which may attract customer attention over many other competing products. So it's all about telling the right stories, and the stories have to be ethical, because customers are smart today. We cannot lie to the customers, so we have to be creative. At the same time, we have to appeal to them in an ethical manner. So that's what I would say about storytelling and creativity.
Fantastic, thank you. And I think for any of you that have been here with me on this bright yellow stage for the last 2 days, you'll know that storytelling probably in every session we've had for the last 2 days, whatever specialism, whether we've been talking about AI, machine learning, digital, PR, the word storytelling has come up. So it's a beautiful segue to my last question, and I'm going to read you all something because otherwise I'll get it wrong. From Fernando Machado, who is, if you don't know, the CMO of Burger King globally, and behind things like that moldy Whopper that came out, and the Pride Burger, and all the crazy, brave, really uncomfortable marketing that Burger King has been doing. Now, about 2 weeks ago, Fernando said this. He said, I think one of the most important things if you want to do great advertising, innovation, or design is that the marketing team really needs to fight to make it happen. I would prefer to go down in flames than just stay doing average work that the consumers don't notice. Now, I think I'm absolutely convinced he said that, because when you look at his work, I don't even know how he got. I mean, I know some of those things took him 8 months to sign off. So seriously, there's some fighting going on internally and some real belief. Ritchie, how do we handle that? Because we're all tired. We've had 2020. We don't know where the world is going. And now, on top of everything that you four have told me these CMOs need to do, now they need to fight. How do they do that, Ritchie? How do you fight for your work?
Look, I think you do need to fight. I mean, you're operating in, with Machado operating in a global, multifaceted organization. And clearly, you need to get your stakeholders on side. And largely, of course, and we talked about this, the misconceptions of marketing sometimes happen across the organization. So actually, you're fighting across a number of different levers. And I think that's important to do. I think what Burger King have done amazingly effectively is they actually put out campaigns across using all the marketing levers. It's not just about communications. It's much more about using all the 4 Ps of marketing. And I think that in itself is part of the fight that we have to continue as marketers to be seen beyond just a communications function. So I think that is definitely one of the key things. The other 2 points that I would make is we have to, and CMOs have to recognize that their decisions are all strategic bets. There's no certainties. Across all of other functions, marketers themselves have to be brave and be seen to kind of go, well, yes, this could work, this may not. But it's the strategic bets based on the insight, based on the data, and based on intuition are also very, very critically important. The final point that I'd make about CMOs is that we have to recognize that the best CMOs have non-linear career paths. And what I mean by that is they have to be able to stand by their conviction. And it doesn't, the best CMOs we talk about, Machado being one, the ability to kind of put themselves on the line day in, day out for their beliefs in their campaigns is what's going to win them the fight and ultimately win great creative work. And CMOs have to be brave enough to do that, recognizing that ultimately taking the safety approach will not get them to succeed, nor their organizations. So non-linear career paths are going to be important. So some of the key things to be thinking about.
Fantastic. So non-linear, multifaceted, multimedia, brave thinking. Paul, tell me, how do we do this, right? This is complex stuff. We're fighting for our work. We're doing it across channels. What would you recommend? How do we build this resilience as CMOs to keep going?
Yeah, I think this is ultimately going to come down to the business capabilities of the organization as well as your operating model. So I'm a big fan of having a very clear delineation when it comes to roles and responsibility. So one of the key takeaways out of Rich's point for me, and I believe for our audience, is make sure that you fight all the right battles. So don't waste your energy on the small fry. Make sure that you understand where the biggest impact for the business is, and make sure how you can articulate the importance of those battles to your stakeholders. So put your empirical hat on, make sure you build a strong business case, and make sure that you can convince people that will support you with the resources and their attention before you venture out. Because if you can't convince your peers, you're gonna have a very, very tough battle outside. So my point is, if you really want to test the waters, test them internally, and make sure, that you go wide and you go hard in order to make sure that you build the necessary alliances internally, and then you can win all the battles.
Fantastic. So test and learn, resilience, and just going out there and really putting conviction into your decisions. Saleema, just short thoughts from you on that. I want to give the audience a chance to ask some questions as well. But any builds on what Paul and Ritchie said there?
Sure, yeah, I'd like to merge a little bit of what was said and just bring a new perspective. Is essentially really being able to meet people where they're at. That's what marketing is about, is knowing what story to tell. And so just the amount of effort we put into, or CMOs put into telling that story externally to consumers, I think that same level of effort needs to be put in internally to get the buy-in from senior leadership and from different parts of the organization. What story do we tell them? What message do we need to give them? How do we meet them where they're at? How do we see the internal customer journey and figure out to what extent are we educating and making people aware versus engaging further and taking action? And so I think we have to see things similarly as we see it to consumers. How do we actually bring that in with the employees and with different parts of the organization to get that buy-in? I think the rejection, I think the resilience is needed to handle that rejection, but I think ultimately that's when great ideas are born. That's when innovation happens. And so I think just meeting people where they're at so that, you know, if there is a smaller rejection, you know how to pitch it later in the future, and looking at that failure as an opportunity is key. I think using tools like, you know, effort impact matrices, figuring out, like we talked about, the battles, figuring out what battles to pick, what's the level of effort needed, and you want to ideally minimize the level of effort and have the biggest impact. So keeping that in mind. And essentially, yes, just viewing it as an internal marketing campaign, and how can you have a successful internal marketing campaign?
Fantastic. And Nalin, anything to add on all of those insights to close off?
Yeah, I mean, Burger King has had its own share of failed, terrible marketing campaigns, especially the one I remember with the mascot of the king that they had come out with, which kind of bombed, and they had terribly failed at that. And probably that's the reason they lost the number 2 position to Wendy's and went on to number 3. So the point is that the CMOs have to be on their toes constantly. And I think that's what Burger King CMO meant. Understanding the customer needs is absolutely of paramount importance. So if you're not in touch with your customers' needs, any marketing campaign you spend money on, I don't think that's going to give you anything.
Absolutely. Brilliant,
Thank you.
Brilliant sort of thought to summarize then, which is truly, if you're going to be brave, you have to know your consumers. If you know your consumers, then maybe you'll be brave enough to be brave. Any questions from the audience to this brave member panel up here about being comfortable with the uncomfortable, about any of the things we've spoken about, measurement, open doors, leaning in, test and learn? Please, sir, there's a microphone just here.
Hello. Thank you all for this great session. I have a couple of questions, if you don't mind. First, in your respective markets, how less resistant businesses have been to the changes that these uncertain times have brought upon us? I remember at the beginning of the pandemic, a lot of the businesses kind of put all their marketing efforts and campaigns on hold, not knowing where are we going and what's going to come next. How less resistant our industries are now in your respective markets? And most importantly...
Okay, sorry,
oh,
I was going to say let's do one first.
All right, fine.
So otherwise I'll forget what you said, so just let me do that one. Guys, did you hear that okay? Perfect.
Yep.
So Ritchie, you're nodding with a smile there. Do you want to give us your thoughts on that?
Well, look, I think the pandemic has certainly kind of had a bit of a curve effect when it comes to the UK. Certainly, you know, the initial stages, there was a little bit of sort of shock, panic, and as a consequence, by the way, 81% of marketing organizations in the UK reported by Marketing Week actually cut budgets during the pandemic. So I think, to your point, I think you're spot on. I think what then sort of happened was post shock point was the marketing budget and effort went very much into a pivot scenario to see how people could then become much more customer centric to offer solutions that both were commercially viable, but also were also in the customer interest. And you know what I felt was in many ways quite nice was how fast customers or organizations were able to respond to the challenges, although perhaps not pulling on the communications lever, which I think is quite interesting from a marketing context. Marketers actually started using the other 3 Ps more effectively during that point in time. Finally, just coming back to where we are today, companies like Unilever, for example, have now already started to ramp up that communication lever back in and committed to having more advertising spend in the market as we move into 2021. So I think things are starting to come back to some norm and reality, although I'm hopeful that they still have their hands on the other joysticks as well in terms of those other levers.
Super, thank you, Ritchie. So would you like to ask your second question? Up, down, up, down. Thank you.
All right, first, sorry, I didn't introduce myself. My name is Ala. I am the Strategy and Operations Manager at IC Media, based in Abu Dhabi. The second question is this. How important is it for businesses, not only on CMO levels, but across the entire organization, to reassess their target audience, especially in areas like the United States where there's a shift in culture to an extent, when we saw a lot of examples of businesses changing not only on the target audience analysis levels, but also from the brand perspective, starting from even the names, the corporate identity of the name, and the brand messaging as well. So how important is it for CMOs and businesses to really reevaluate and reassess their target audience and this ever-changing transition and the business culture as a whole? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Nalin, do you want to give us your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I think you're right that what Ritchie said, that marketing budgets were squeezed on. Ideally, in times like these, I think companies really kind of cut off on marketing and training, which I believe there are two functions which should not be cut off, especially in these times, because you need to kind of be in touch with the market. But the hard fact is that even our organization saw that. But I think with the marketing budget becoming premium, what we looked at is, I mean, we focused on the right things to advertise or market on. Like so much money we used to spend on general marketing awareness or on all products. So we kind of became more meticulous in looking at what products are actually contributing to the bottom line and how we can do some intentional marketing, reaching out to specific customers, to a targeted kind of focused work. So that's what we've been doing. And I think we've been successful in doing that. If you see on an overall basis, we might have curtailed marketing budget significantly, but the effect that we have got ultimately during the pandemic time, I think we are pretty satisfied with what we've done.
Fantastic, thank you. Did that answer your question? Wonderful. Any more questions before we go to lunch? We've talked about measurement, we've talked about engagement, we've talked about multifacetedness. Anyone else got any questions before I let these wonderful people go? No, I think, guys, with that, we're going to say thank you very much. Round of applause, please, for the panelists. Thank you, guys, so much for joining us from all around Abu Dhabi,
Thank you so much.
Oman, the UK.
Thank you. Goodbye from Oman.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye. Okay.
Bye-bye.
One morning's content all finished, and it's time for lunch, which is not here, so outside. So please...